Welcome to Small Arms Solutions. Today we have a very interesting two-part series on magazines. Now, magazines, for somebody who's worked in manufacturing, development, engineering, as well as troubleshooting, is probably responsible for 80% of the malfunctions in the M16 M4 weapon system. And over the last, I'd probably say 6 to 8 months, I have been on the hunt for pretty much every magazine that's available in the industry today. And pretty much I'm only missing maybe 2 or 3, and these are ones that are more obscure, not really well known, just more like they're pretty rare. And what you're seeing here is this is an example of pretty much everything that's out there. Are all manufacturers made equally? Absolutely not. These magazines vary from military grade to plinker grade at best. There are some that you could certainly use as a defense magazine, other ones that will be strictly range magazines. The order that we're going in is not the order that my preference are in. I do have a couple preferences, and I will talk to you about those coming up. But I want to go a little bit into sort of the history of the magazines. Traditionally, we started off with the 20-round magazine during the Vietnam War. Originally, we had a steel magazine that was the waffle pattern that had problems, and then we went to the aluminum. Now, as the aluminum magazines were manufactured, they were designed to be disposable. They were a disposable commodity. They weren't meant to be used over and over and over and over. And that continued with the development of the 3-round magazine. Again, they were disposable commodities, not designed to be used over, and over. They were supposedly lightweight and to be discarded after use. And of course, that's not how it ended up happening. And even on the battlefield, it seems to be more of a problem in training areas in the military than it does actually on the battlefields. Because most units would provide you with new magazines before they would deploy you. But that goes from unit to unit, however that goes. 20-round magazines were the early part of the Vietnam War, and they were manufactured by several different manufacturers. They worked quite well. There was a fallacy in Vietnam that you can only put 18 because you didn't want the spring to wear out, which was never true. These things were developed for 20 rounds, and that's the way they were designed. The whole point of not installing 20 rounds in them was they were difficult to load on a closed bolt. So it was never an issue with springs wearing out. We see the same issue with the GI 3-round magazines. If you put a full 3 rounds in these magazines, they can be difficult to insert on a closed bolt. Open bolt, no problem. There's no issue whatsoever. On a closed bolt, you drop 1 or 2 rounds out of there, you give more spring in there, they're easier to insert on a closed bolt. So let's talk a little bit about the manufacturing of these magazines. I have to put a call out to C Products Defense for providing these, but we're looking at here is your basic GI 3-round magazine. Basically, you have 2 clamshells. And looking in the back, you'll see there are tabs and locking tabs. Basically, all we're doing is we're inserting the clamshell into the other, and we're going to be lining up those 2 tabs. To what we see right here. So now we have it together. And from here, this will go into a machine, and for the most part, these are all done by robots now. So you'll have your spot welds done on the front, and on the rear, you'll have a full magazine well body. They will go to either anodizing, they'll either be magnetized to have some other finish put on them, or they will have the dry film lubricant put on. Most GI magazines were the very undurable dry film lubricant, which is generally corrosion resistant, but it wore off relatively easily. And this is a much more durable finish that's done by C Products. And that's pretty much every aluminum, every steel magazine is made the exact same way. So what I want to go over first is some of the GI magazines and the GI variants. The first 3-round magazine that was issued with the M16A1 was a black follower aluminum magazine. This was used right up until the adoption of the M16A2 with the changeover to a new follower to what we see here, which is the green follower. This was designed for use with the M855 ball ammunition to improve feed reliability. It was not anti-tilt, but it was better than the original one. The next iteration would be around 2009 or so, 2010, which was the tan follower magazine. This was a true anti-tilt follower. Now, these magazines from the beginning had some very big issues. First off, if you look at the way the rounds would sit, you will see the follower has on the green. You'll see on the right is where your tab is, and it's on the left side on the tan follower. This sort of was a problem because once these were fully loaded, many people who would go to check their magazines, they would check to see which side they were on to see if the magazine was full. And now this was on the opposite side. Unfortunately, these had issues In the beginning, I had found these issues while working with the troops out of the 10th Mountain Division at Fort Drum while working at Colt. They had contacted me and told me while I was working at Colt that they were having problems with these magazines feeding in their M16A4s, A2s, and M4s. I had them send in some samples to me at Colt and turn over to engineering and tested, and it was found that, yes, indeed, there was some feeding problems. At that point, we wanted to get more for testing. I was able to get authorization from my boss to, if they can provide me with one case of these tan follower magazines, I would give them 2 cases of Pmags, which we did. We got some testing in and come to find there were some major problems. We had Picatinny come into Colt, and the production was stopped until it was fixed. The magazine wall bodies were pretty much the same. There was a change in the spring and the followers. Next iteration. This would come a few years later with the adoption of the M855A1 ammunition, which is the Enhanced Performance Magazine. You'll see we have a blue follower on here. And there were some modifications that were made to the feed lips. The purpose of the blue follower and the new dimensions was to present the bullet higher into the chamber. So it would clear the barrel extension as well as the upper receiver. It would go directly into the chamber, so this would prevent damage to the barrel extension or to the receiver. This was very soon replaced, for the most part, as first by the U.S. Marine Corps with the new Pmag Gen 3. Now, I'm going to come out right out and say I think the Pmags are probably the best magazine in the market. These Gen 3s work in everything. From the beginning, before even the introduction of the M855A1, these did present the rounds higher, so you didn't have any of these issues that you had with the Enhanced Performance Magazine. This is being used pretty much by every branch right now. You're still seeing some of the EPMs, Enhanced Performance Magazines, in the Army. Marine Corps switched directly over to these. And you also had seen throughout the War on Terror, I remember seeing in Afghanistan where these were on sale at the PX. So soldiers could go in there and buy their own PMags because they didn't want to use the GI magazine because they were having problems with them. So units have bought these on their own credit cards for the units, throughout the, not through the regular procurement process, but they bought them. These magazines have made a big difference in the performance of this rifle. So there's sort of a quick overview of the development of the U.S. military magazines. So now we're going to jump right into probably what I think is probably the most revolutionary and the best magazine probably created for this rifle, the Magpul Pmag. These were truly the first successful polymer magazine ever for the M16 M4 platform. We go back in time, and we're going to talk about some of the thermals in the past. They never had durability or reliability, and they were such a disaster that most manufacturers stayed away from even the thought of polymer magazines, let alone ever knowing it would become the most popular magazine in any military anywhere in the world for the magazine platform. What I'm holding here is the original Pmag. There's two versions. You have what's referred to as the mag level, which allows you to see how many rounds are in the magazine with these clear windows, and you have the solid. These also have the original mag pulls in the bottom, which enable you to pull them easily out of your pouch. So these are what we refer to as the Gen 2, and the Gen 2 is also referred to as the Mo. The Gen 2 Mo is probably the most popular OEM magazine in the industry. Over the years, from the beginning, I've been with these magazines from the Gen 1s, done a lot of testing on them, worked a little bit with Magpul during those early days, and we have had extensive experience with these, full auto, adverse conditions, you name it, drop conditions. These have been undoubtedly the best in the industry by a long shot for a long time. The newest iterations are what we refer to as the Gen 3. Now the Gen 3, again, we have the mag level and the standard. What was done differently with the Gen 3 mostly was the way the magazine was formed. The original Gen 2s and Gen 1s would not fit in some of the firearms. Well, they would fit in the FN SCAR, but there was a follower issue on the back of the magazine issue. Also, the HK416, because of the shape of the magazine well, they wouldn't fit in there. There was a export magazine that was designed for that. So it would take some of these, the HK416s. Then you would have the SA-80s of the British rifles. This takes care of all. This is 100% compatible with every rifle that I'm aware of. It will fit in the HK416. The back will work in an FN SCAR. Slightly more durable material. Never really needed to be that much more durable, but it was more durable material. And these have gone on to be very, very popular. They're a little bit more expensive than the Gen 2s and the Mo's, but they definitely were an improvement. And they also had introduced a 40-round magazine in this as well. 40-round magazines work well for competitive shooters, for fast gun shooters. For a tactical perspective, they're a little bit too long for most tactical applications. You can't really go prone with them. They're not as practical for shooting for soldier use, for military use, for law enforcement use, because, again, you have that too long. You can't get down in the prone if you have to, but they're great for competitors. They also had introduced a drum magazine, the D60. This was one of the later ones on the market, and you did have, which we're going to see later on in the video, you'll see the X50. There was a couple other ones that I didn't even bother going into because they didn't work. This is the first drum magazine that I have never had a malfunction with. We have used these in multiple full autos. You're going to see some video coming up here with these being used in full autos without a single hitch. These also have been working in the M249 saws without any problem. They're relatively easy to load. The last few rounds can be a little bit stiff. You do have a window in the back here that gives you, so lets you know how many rounds are in there also. But overall, if I had to say the best magazine in the industry, I think that it happens to be the Magpul Pmag. Next magazine we're going to look at here is the Hexmag. Now this has been out for quite some time. They've also been considered a top tier magazine. The durability and reliability is excellent. I have used these for quite a few years. They also have some for the SR25 type. There are some different color followers and end plates, which is good for anybody who may color code with ammunition. Say we're going to have orange for M193, we're going to have blue for M855, or green for M855, or we're going to have yellow for a particular kind of hollow point or a particular kind of soft point. So it allows you to color code. This is an excellent magazine. I've been used for quite some time. This is certainly what I would refer to as a duty or a combat type magazine. The next two we have here are manufactured by Tango Down. These have also been excellent quality magazines. I can't say I've had as good of luck as I had with some of the other ones. I would probably put these more in line with a range magazine or a very light duty use magazine for law enforcement. I don't think these are what you would refer to as military grade. Reliability has been decent. There are some rifles that have been a little bit more finicky with them than others. But if you happen to have a rifle that likes them, these are a very good magazine. Just due to the design of the followers, the way that these are very difficult to disassemble to clean. Contrary to popular belief, magazines do have to be disassembled and cleaned. The thing is, you have to know not to use any solvents or any oil in the inside of the magazine or on the spring. They just need to be wiped out. And this magazine makes it very difficult for you to disassemble. It's not meant to come apart, which can cause a little bit of issue with maintenance. The next magazines we're looking at are manufactured by CAA and a company out of Israel. These magazines have been quite common with the Israeli military with use in the Tavors. These are three of the different types that they offer. The first is a standard magazine, no frills. The second one is more like their mag level, where you have an open window so you can see how many rounds are in there. And then we also have one in the back here, which has a round count in the back. So as the rounds go down, it gives you the actual number that's in there. Now, for as far as durability, I will not say these are the most durable magazines that are available out there. I have had several that have cracked on the spine and not been good at all. I've had a couple of them that have worked very well. Overall, they're not a magazine that I would use as a real world magazine. I don't find a problem with them for range magazines. Perhaps I did get a few bad ones, but generally one is forgiven because it could be a bad magazine. But once you get into two or three, then it's a problem. And the problem would always be they would split down the back on the spine. Another thing, it's not that it's a big deal, but due to the fact that I shoot a lot of rounds and I have a lot of arthritis issues, I use a mag pump for loading magazines. This will not work in the mag pump. That's one of the things that I did notice. They do use the up Lulus, generally will work on them. But for the most part, I look at the CAA magazines as more of a range magazine, not necessarily a duty magazine. The Israeli military, I'm sure, disagrees. They've used them quite a bit in the past, which is fine. I'm only going to tell you the experience that I had with them. I don't give you anybody else's experience other than my own. But these are decent range magazines. The next magazine we have here is the Swt Magazine. So looking at these two magazines here, the SWT on my right and the CAA on my left, you will see these magazines look awfully familiar. In fact, the mold is almost identical for as far as that area down here. One of the things that we're going to see when we look at some of these magazines, you will see other manufacturers who make magazines for OEMs and will put their labels on them. They'll make some kind of changes to them just that were visual. These magazines, there's no doubt in my mind, were made by the exact same company. You'll see the exact same way that they're marked. There's no difference. The Swt Magazine, I've only put a few magazines through it, seeing what it was and who it was made by. I didn't really need to do too much else with it. It's the same magazine, just rebranded. But again, good range magazines, light law enforcement use, military grade, not in my opinion. The next magazine we're looking at is manufactured by Fusil LLC, USA. Not what you would call a good magazine, and we have lots of experience with this. These were very common on the early days of the global war on terror. They were sold as supposed to be a very high quality magazine. Again, they were steel, they were heavy duty, but they didn't work. At Colt, we got information that these were being used out there, and they wanted to know if there was something that Colt would ever endorse. So they had sent Colt quite a few of them to do testing. Well, we did, and it was a nightmare. The magazines did not work. We had multiple failures to feed. It was not a reliable magazine whatsoever. So this magazine here would be an immediate no for me. Too much bad experience, and then seeing what happened with them at Colt during those testing, because these guys kept calling us all the time too in sales and marketing, trying to get us to sell these. And we gave them a shot, and they were bad. And I can say from the two of these magazines that I had, I got frustrated with them, and I just stopped using them years and years ago. They're still out there. You'll still find them. They're very easily identifiable. By the way, they have this little clip on the bottom, and they say Fusil. But these are a magazine that I would avoid like the plague. The next magazines are probably what I refer to as the second finest magazine ever developed. These are the Lancer Awm Magazines, or Advanced Warfighter Magazines. These are a hybrid. You have inserts on the top that are steel with a polymer body. Now, these go back to probably around the 2004 or 5 time period. Lancer was working with Dymaco in Canada to make a magazine for Colt. It was referred to as the Green Magazine. It was a hybrid magazine. It was a joint effort between Colt Canada, who used Colt's TDP, along with Lancer. I happen to have seen and had some experience with the original prototypes. The magazine worked well, reliable as could be. Well, what basically would kill the magazine was DEET. Those of you who aren't familiar with what the DEET is, it's the bug juice. It's the bug spray that the U.S. military has used since God knows when, at least the Vietnam War, as far as I know. That final test, which is one that was conducted by Dymaco, the magazine was placed in a vise full of 30 rounds. They sprayed the DEET all over the feed lips, put a camera on it, came back the next morning, and found where the bond was broken between the polymer and the inserts, and the bullets were all over the floor. Well, at that time was when Colt Defense bought Dymaco, and it now became Colt Canada. And Colt's infinite wisdom, when they saw that, they immediately stopped the program, and they canceled it. Dymaco was, well, now Colt Canada, was not happy with that because they knew they had a product that just needed a little bit more development. Well, Lancer knew that they had an excellent product, and they knew that they were just needed a few more tweaks, and it was good to go. So an agreement was signed where anything that was produced, because these were developed with Colt's technical data, that Colt would get a royalty on, and Lancer went to work to build a better magazine. So after Colt pulled the plug, Lancer hired a gentleman named Kaz McManus to come in and fix the problem with the DEET and the magazine feed lips, which Kaz did. And from there, the magazine went through several upgrades until what we see now is the Advanced Warfighter magazine. And even according to that designer, he feels this is probably one of the best magazines on the face of the earth. We have extensive use with these. I have had extensive use. In fact, during the early days of Lancer, there's a gentleman there named Scott Velarde who was in charge of a lot of the sales and marketing and whatnot, and I worked with him doing some beta testing of the original Green magazines and the updated ones that were going on after that. We even got some that went to the City of Rochester Police Department SWAT team, and they were doing all their testing and all their shooting with them, so I had quite a bit of knowledge of these. The later versions that were smoke color instead of the green worked quite well. This was just a next level, and again, this was where Mr. McManus was involved with. These come in several colors. These come in solid black, solid tan, green, and so forth, and you have a smoke and you have a regular clear. These magazines are extremely popular with original equipment manufacturers that come with them, such as SIG, just to name one of them. Now, there's another company I want to talk about here, which is brand new. It's called Thrill Industries. Now, what's interesting, there is a lineage to the Lancer magazine, not so much by design, but by the engineer. Mr. McManus left Lancer at some point and started up his own company called Thrill Industries, where what he did was he developed a new magazine, which we see here. Now, these magazines were not designed to compete with the Lancer AWMs. According to talking to Mr. McManus, he felt that the best magazine available in the world right now probably would be the AWMs. This was more so, in his opinion, to compete with the Pmag, which was very much the same type of solid polymer magazine. We just got these in a couple days ago. I'd only had a chance to run a couple magazines through the rifles, and they were 100%. This is a magazine that we will be continuing to do a significant amount of testing on. Looking at them, they're extremely high quality, well made, drop free and everything I put in them. We don't have as much trigger time on these, but this is something that you'll be hearing about and seeing in later future videos to come. But you have the same gentleman who worked for Lancer who started his own company and made these magazines. So we're looking at a lot of experience in the development, and we're looking at a lot of experience in know-how of making a durable magazine. So I do expect great things from these. Only time will tell. These magazines are manufactured by MWG in Bulgaria. These are a magazine that are all solid polymer. We have a 40-round magazine and we have a 30-round magazine. They are marked IK 520 for the 40 and IK 510 for the 5.56. These I got sent to me by a friend of mine who had a lot of work with SOCOM, and at some point this gentleman was working with them. SOCOM was using these pretty regularly with these 40-round magazines, and he was extremely fond of them. So he had sent me a couple of them and said, "Hey, give these things a try." So I went out and I bought one of the 30s, and I've been testing these, and this is going back at least, I'd say, 7-8 years. And I've had these same magazines for 7-8 years, and they're pretty much used with every gun that I test. So no, I can't even tell you how many thousands of rounds have been through these magazines, and there's been no failures at all. They tend to stick in some lower receivers. Now, again, when you're looking at lower receivers, you'll see a lot of lower receivers that are not within a quote mil spec. They can be tighter, they can be looser, and you look at that stack of tolerances with the low end of the magazine well, with the high end of the magazine, you can get a little bit of sticking every once and again. It can be a little bit more difficult to pull out, but it's not a mechanical problem at all. They do have witness holes on the back to tell you when the magazines are full. They can be loaded with stripper clips. This is an extremely high quality magazine that I would recommend to anybody. It's not just as a planker, but as a duty magazine. These magazines are suitable for military use. They have been manufactured in Bulgaria. As Bulgaria, you guys know, make a lot of the solid polymer AK magazines. So you're taking a lot of that same technology and applying it to AR magazines. So this is certainly one that I would recommend. Magazines we're looking at here are the Mission First Tactical. Now, we have here the Gen 1 Mission First Tactical, which is a relatively thin polymer. Now, when these first came out, I had a couple of them split right down the back here. I contacted Mission First Tactical. They took care of it immediately. They sent me 2 new ones. And those 2 new ones I never had that experience with. But these magazines, if you were to compare it to a Pmag or some of the other ones that we looked at, is a little less strong than many of the other ones. Well, the Gen 2... they fixed that. The Gen 2 magazines are excellent. I've had these for probably about a year or so. They've been used extensively. As you're going to see from a lot of the videos where we're going to plop in shooting footage of us using them, the magazines being used in both semi-auto and fully automatic firearms. Well, these have been used in both, and we have had no problems with these whatsoever. These, I definitely would say, are LE and military quality. For as far as the military is concerned, I haven't seen enough testing in real world to show that. I can tell you from my testing of the ones that I've seen, they're strong, they're solid. I've not broken any. The steams are not excessive here where you see anything that's going to break. I'm very fond of the ones that have the windows on here that give you the, I'm going to tell you how many rounds are in there, but they have both for whichever you would like. These can also be loaded from stripper clips with the clamp that goes on the top. Quite fond of these. I would highly recommend the Mission First Tactical Gen 2s. Again, not the Gen 1s, but the Gen 2s. The next magazine is an Ultimag, which is also an Israeli magazine. I came across these at SHOT Show several years ago with the Mako group, and I thought they were quite nice. They sort of look like a Pmag in a way. You had the window. As you can see, this window's filthy because it's been used so much. So I had gotten a hold of them. They had sent me maybe 5 or 10 of these, and I had been using these for many, many, many years. Never had an issue with them at all. Reliability, durability, strength. These also have the grooves for using the stripper clips. A lot of full auto fire, semi-automatic fire as well. The Ultimax magazines I highly recommend. There is a newer version out here that has basically a strip that you pull and it basically lowers down the magazine. I have not tried that one, so I'm not going to give you an opinion on that one, but the standard ones I have used and I'm very, very fond of. Another magazine is the UTC magazine, which is also, all intents and purposes, it's a Ultimax magazine. You see some differences on the way that's stippled here versus the way that it's done on here, but for the most part, this is the exact same mold with some modifications to give it a slight difference in look. So there's no question these come out of the same molds. Whether the molds are brought here to the U.S. or whether this is made in Israel, I don't know. But I can tell you these magazines are pretty much identical and their performance is identical. I've only had a couple of these and only been using them for about a year or so. I've had no negative experiences with them at all. They're a relatively inexpensive magazine, definitely a plinker magazine, probably some good law enforcement use as well. There's really yet to be enough testing done to determine if these are military grade. To determine military grade, you're looking at a significant amount of testing, durability, reliability testing, which I don't put enough rounds for them to be able to do something like that. But I can tell you about longevity and using them regularly. And the Israeli magazine has worked like a bastard. It's always worked very, very well. This one here, from what limited use I have, works well, but I certainly would have no problem recommending. Now we talk about magazines that are barely even worth plinker. These MSAR magazines are probably been the cheapest magazines that have been out there for many, many years. The reliability is absolutely horrible. I've had many instances where these magazines have been not even fit into rifles because they've been oversized, the polymer. I've seen several of them break. It is just not a magazine that I can tell you anything good about. I'm sure with the magazine craze, people are buying every magazine that they can. I'm sure some of you have had good luck with these. But the amount of bad experience that I have had with them personally, with multiple magazines, and having manufacturers, OEMs who wouldn't ever even consider these to come with their rifles, I would recommend you stay away from these MSAR magazines, no matter how cheap they are. These are not a good magazine for you to be depending on. If you don't mind having spare range magazines where you can put stuff that you wouldn't use for real world, I guess they're okay, where you're not going to really be risking anything. But I tend not to like to keep things around here that I can't trust, and I know I can't trust these. So a big thumbs down for the MSAR magazines. We spoke earlier about Polymer magazines and their history. Well, if we go back in time, probably the first Polymer magazine was developed by Thermold for Dymaco back for the C7 project, which was their Weapons Improvement Program, or SARP, Small Arms Upgrade Program in Canada. These magazines, when they were initially developed for the C7 and C8 rifles, were a failure. The durability was not there. So they ended up switching over to aluminum USGI type magazines. Later on, Thermold and Dymaco went to work on this, and they were able to improve this for the most part to make it a decent magazine. Now, I will say that by today's standpoint, these would be considered garbage for the most part. They're very, you can push inward on them. They were not very durable. They were very easily broken. They were not what you would refer to as a really durable magazine. There were a couple countries where Dymaco or Coal Canada has been able to sell these to. And many of those countries have quickly gone over to the some other magazine that was far more durable. But these are very rare getting into the U.S. This is an actual Canadian government, Canadian military one, or a Dymaco one. You can see the maple leaf on there. Well, commercially, Thermold has made them as well. And what we see here is a new production Thermold magazine, very similar in mold, but the material is much better. It's much stronger. These here, I've had a couple of these, and they've been very, very hit or miss. This particular one here, which has been in my rotation, I've had failures to feed with. I've had some failures to insert with. I had another one I used also that's been okay. So my opinion on Thermold is hit and miss. It's definitely a plinker grade. Law enforcement, I guess you have to try the individual magazine to see if you want to use it for duty use. Military, in my opinion, is a no-go. But this is really your starting point with Polymer magazines, and this is what Magpul had to overcome, which they did. These worked so bad in the beginning years that Magpul, they had nothing but an uphill battle. But they did it. They were able to change the way the entire world felt about polymer magazines for ARs. So this is the end of part one. Again, we have quite a few magazines we're going over. We look forward to starting out part two, where we start talking about the OK industries and several of the other ones, including some of these higher capacity ones. So I hope you did enjoy this video. If you do, please click like, please subscribe, and even better, share.